This video will show how to create the following two small TypeScript programs. First, creating a new TypeScript file in an empty directory, implementing it with a trivial program, printing the classical phrase "Hello World" to the screen. Then the Hello World program will be replaced with another program which receives input argument from the command line and also receives keyboard input from the user. This video is part of at least one playlist showing how to do the above with different programming languages. There should be a link to that playlist in the description below. Prerequisites. You, the viewer of this video, are assumed to have some skills in at least some programming language. I will not explain basic concepts such as what is a variable or what is an array or what is a for loop. Even if you have never written source code with TypeScript, you are assumed to be able to understand, for example, what this TypeScript code below does. In this video, I am using Windows 10, and I will now show what version of Dino I have installed. As you can see, the Dino version is 1.18. Later in this video, I will use Node, and will then show my version of Node. The Windows command dir shows that I am starting with an empty directory. Now I create a new directory named ts_dino with the Windows command md, and then navigate into it with cd. By the way, later in this video I will use Node instead of Dino, and I will then create a directory ts_node. Now I will start Visual Studio Code in the new empty directory I just created by typing code and a dot, which is the path to the current directory. When Visual Studio Code has started, I create a new TypeScript file, arguments_inputs.ts, in the new directory. Then I implement the initial trivial Hello World program by using the console.log method for printing the text to the screen. Now I am just showing with the command dir that the TypeScript file has been created in the ts_dino directory. The program can now be executed by typing dino run and then the file name. As you can see, the program now displays Hello World as expected. Now I will replace this Hello World implementation with a program that will receive and print out arguments provided from the command line. And the program will also ask the user for keyboard input and will then print out to the screen what the user typed. For this purpose, I have prepared some pseudocode, which I will paste into the program, but within comments, since it of course would not be possible to execute. Then I will modify it by changing it into TypeScript code, which can be executed. Now I am showing how the input arguments will be provided when the program is executed. The arguments will be added after dino run file name and then a space between each argument. So here I am showing 3 arguments to the program. The program arguments can be retrieved from a variable named args in the Dino namespace. I am receiving it into a local variable with the same name as the variable in the Dino namespace. And it would work without explicitly declaring the variable as a string array, but I am choosing to be explicit since I want to show the type in the TypeScript code. The Visual Studio Code editor is complaining about the namespace Dino by showing it in red color, but I can fix that problem with some configuration through the View menu and then Command Palette. There you can write Dino and then select the option Initialize Workspace Configuration and then answer yes regarding the question Enable Dino linting. I also get the question about enabling Dino unstable APIs, but my answer there is no. Now you can see that the red color disappears, since Visual Studio Code now recognizes Dino after this configuration. I also want to mention that I had already installed the Dino plugin for Visual Studio Code, and I will now show that plugin. You can click the button Extension in the left panel, There you can search for the Dino plugin, and as you can see, the plugin I am using is created by the user named DinoLand. I can also show two other plugins I have installed, which are relevant in this video. The TypeScript plugin, which is created by Microsoft, as you can see. Later in this video, I will use Node with NPM. So I am now also showing the NPM plugin, which also is a plugin created by Microsoft. Now I will implement a TypeScript for loop, which will iterate the string array with program arguments and will then print them to the screen with the method console.log. I'm using a so-called template literal with a $sign and the curly braces around the variable name. And please note that backticks are used here instead of quotation marks, since I want to use template literal. Now I am executing the program with 3 arguments, and as you can see, it works as expected. The keyboard input can be implemented with the Dino function prompt. That function receives a text to become displayed for the user. And then when the user has typed something with the keyboard, that text will be returned from the function. I am receiving the typed text into a variable and then use a template literal again with backticks, the $sign and the curly braces to output the text to the screen with the method console.log. When I execute the program in the same way as before, it will still iterate the program arguments, of course, since that part of the program has not been changed. Then the program also asks for a name, and when I type a name, it is printed to the screen with the prefix hello, just as expected. I also would like to mention that I did not use an explicit type for the variable returned from the function prompt, but I will try to do that now. If you have not looked in the documentation, you might guess that the type should be a string. However, Visual Studio Code complains about the string type by displaying the variable in red. Also, you can see the actual problem. The type should be string or null. An or is defined by a pipe character. Now I will also try to execute it, just to verify that the Dino runtime shows the same problem as Visual Studio Code. Indeed, the Dino runtime also displays a message saying that the type should be string or null. So now I will try to declare the variable type as string or null by writing string and null and a pipe character between. Then, when trying to execute, it works again, just like before when the type had not been specified. Now I will switch from Dino to instead use the Node runtime, which does not receive program arguments nor read keyboard input in the same way as the Dino runtime. First, I navigate up in the directory structure to the dev directory, and then create a new subdirectory ts-node parallel to the previously used directory ts-dino. Then I navigate into the new directory with command cd. Now I will also show my installed versions of Node and NPM. The Node version is 17.4. The NPM version is 8.3. Then I copy the TypeScript file from the ts-dino directory to the ts-node directory, since I will then modify it to be able to use it with a Node runtime instead of using Dino. Now I am creating and initializing the file package.json with the command npm init and use the flag y to skip the interactive questions. Then I add TypeScript as a development dependency to the npm project with the flags I and d. The flag I means install, and the flag D means development dependency. I also add ts-node in the same way with the flags I and D. I can also mention that ts-node with a hyphen is the name of the library, while ts_node is just a name I chose for the directory, which could be any name, so these two names are not related in any way. Now when I have installed TypeScript and ts-node, I can try to execute the TypeScript file by writing npx tsnode followed by the name of the TypeScript file. It failed, as expected, since Node does not provide the prompt function, and not dino-args neither. Now I am starting Visual Studio Code, since I will implement the changes needed to make the code work for Node. I can also show that in package.json you can now see that TypeScript and tsnode have both been added as dev dependencies, since I used the flag D when installing them. In the TypeScript file, I will now replace dino.args with process.args. However, they are not exactly equivalent, since Node's process.args will also contain the name of the executable and the script file as the first two arguments. Therefore, I am using the slice function to get an array without those two first elements. Now I will run the script again with npx tsnode and will also provide 3 arguments after the file name. As you can see, it works as expected. Now I will implement the keyboard input feature. It seems to be necessary with quite a lot of code if you do not want to use a third-party library, which I actually will do later in this video. But first I will show how you can do it without installing a third-party library. First I import readline. Then I use the readline method createInterface with the 2 arguments standard input and standard output. The returned object provides a method question, which is somewhat similar to the Dino function prompt, but instead of returning the text that the user typed, it takes the second parameter, which is a callback function, which will receive the typed text as callback argument. After printing the name from within the callback function by using the method console.log, I also close the object. When I try to execute this Node program, it works as expected. In this program, I have only asked the user for 1 input text, but how would you do it with many sequential inputs? That question has been asked at Stack Overflow by someone who tried with nested callbacks, as you can see in the question. It is quite a long web page about something that is simple in many other programming languages, and it is also simpler to read keyboard input when you're using TypeScript or JavaScript with the Dino runtime, which provides the prompt function. One example of a comment in this Stack Overflow web page. Why is console input so overly complex in Node? And another comment. Why even reading inputs from command line is so complicated, unlike in any other languages? I will provide a link in the description to that web page, so you can see if you can find some solution you think is reasonable. But I will now show how to use a third-party library for reading keyboard input. I will use the library readline sync. At the GitHub web page for the library, you can see some example code. It is almost as simple as the Dino code. Instead of the Dino function prompt, you will use a method question after having imported the library with the function require. But first you have to install it. I am now installing the library readline sync with npm installed. Then you can see in package.json that readline sync has been added as a dependency. Now in the TypeScript file, I remove usage of the previously used readline and will now instead use the installed library readline sync. This library also provides a method named question, but instead of getting the result with an asynchronous callback, the method will return the typed input, just like the prompt function in Dino. As you can see, Visual Studio Code seems to be complaining about something, and I will soon return to that problem, but first I will try to execute the program. When executing the program, you can see that it works as expected. Regarding the problem in Visual Studio Code, it complains about redeclaring a block-scoped variable. I will provide a link in the description to a web page where you can read about this problem. But if you just want to get rid of that annoying red color in Visual Studio Code, Then a quick solution is to add an export statement with empty curly braces. As you can see, the red color now disappeared, and I will also execute the program again just to verify that it still works. And yes, as you can see, the program still works.